Today, to produce decent hard techno, you should know how to create a few fundamental sounds for this style. Aside from a rolling bassline or a distorted 909 kick drum, a saturated screech like this one is also crucial. A year ago I made a similar video with Serum synthesizer, but some people prefer using Ableton effects only. This tutorial is exactly for them. So if you want to lay your hands on more hard or industrial techno sounds, you should check out my hard techno reinforcement sample and Serum preset pack. And the project from this tutorial, along with 80 plus other ones, can be downloaded from my Patreon website. Screeches are fun and easy to create in majority of synthesizer sounds. We can start with making a new MIDI channel and add into it the Wavetable synthesizer. With its initial preset, I will double-click the arrangement area to make a new MIDI clip where I will draw a simple pattern for the screech. We can hear that the sound doesn't match that well the pattern I drew. What do I mean is that here, when we would expect silence, we still hear our sine wave on the first oscillator. The reason for that is the volume envelope, a wavetable's section that controls the volume of the sound over time. The envelope is adjustable with 4 main parameters. The attack tells how much time does the sound take to reach its highest volume. The longer the attack, the longer the fade-in for the sound. Screeches usually have a short fade-in, so we will keep attack no longer than 100 milliseconds. The release parameter, on the other hand, tells for how long the sound is audible once we either depress the key or once the note in the MIDI clip ends. We could say it controls the fade-out for the screech. To have enough silence in between the notes in the MIDI clip, I will shorten the release. At last, there is decay and sustain that work together. If we play a note and look at Ableton's volume meter, you can see the volume of the sound drops in time. The sustain parameter tells by how many decibels the volume of the synthesizer will drop. The decay tells how much time does the synthesizer need to decrease its volume. While it would be possible to make the volume of the synthesizer never drop by setting the sustain to 0, our future screech sound won't be that rhythmic. I want to use both decay and sustain to add rhythm to the sound. We can move now onto the first out of 3 most important steps in Screech sound design, that is the oscillators and their pitch. Screech sounds have lots of high frequencies, so our oscillators should also use waveforms that have lots of harmonic frequencies. That in result will give a sharp and bright sound. For these reasons, we want to use both Wavetable position fader and a Wavetable selector to choose a wavetable or a waveform that looks similar to a sawtooth wave. Of course, a plain saw wave is going to work well too, but if we want from our screech to be a bit more original, we can also try out different wavetables from the basics category. Most of these wavetables can sound alike, so how to know which one will sound the best? Personally, I like to play in the background the kick drum with bassline. When I do hear in background some part of my beat, I have a context in which setting up a synthesizer will be easier and more intuitive. Let's find now a proper wavetable for the first oscillator while the kick plays along. This sounds good, but what is going to make a synthesizer sound fuller is adding a second oscillator to the sound. The second oscillator, though, should have a different pitch to fill a different frequency range. If I just add quickly to the first oscillator a second one with a saw wave with the same pitch, the sound won't change by much. That is why it's important to detune the second oscillator. This sounds better, so let's now find a wavetable that will fit the sound most. At last, I want to adjust the volume of the second oscillator. Since it has only to support the sound coming from the first one, I want to turn down the volume of the second oscillator a bit. Before we move on to the second important step in Screech sound design, I want to show you a sound design trick for more stereo width. Typically, to make synthesizers sound wide and huge, we use effects like delay or reverb that add stereo width to the sound. There are some other ways to achieve that too, but all of them use the same principle of playing through the left speaker a sound that is slightly different from the sound coming from the right one. It's that simple. I am looking now at my two oscillators and I can say the sound coming from them are definitely different. We do not only use a different wavetable, but we also have a difference in pitch. If these two sounds are different, then what's left is to just route one of them to the left speaker more and the second one to the right speaker. For that, we can use pan-in control in both oscillators. The difference in sound might not be that much, but soon on top of that panning trick we will use another tricks for stereo width. We can move on to the second important step in Screech sound design, but before that, let me advertise myself quickly and just say that if you wish to have other sound design or music production subjects explained in such an easy and practical way, consider going onto my website to learn more about my private music production lessons. Free consultations are available as well. The second important step is the unisono detune. This feature is in the wavetable's bottom right corner. What does this section do is it makes the wavetable play multiple copies of the same synthesizer, and this number of copies created is set with the voices parameter. The copies are later slightly pitched up or down, and that pitch difference is set with the amount knob. We have already seen how does the pitch difference make the synthesizer sound fuller, because we have been adjusting the pitch of the second oscillator in relation to the first one. What does the unisono section also do is pan in each copy of the sound slightly to the left and right. This is done automatically, so we won't find here any specific panning control. And we have also seen how does panning work like when we panned manually both oscillators. All of this is a reason for why using unisono detune makes synthesizers sound super smooth and huge. I'm going now to enable the unison detune and choose its detune type. Then we will tell the number of unisono voices, so the number of copies of the same synthesizer and its pitch difference. The third important step to Screech sound design is modulating the pitch of the whole synthesizer. Do you remember what does the volume envelope work like? In Wavetable there are two more envelopes that work just like the amplitude one, and they can be assigned to almost anything you want, including the whole synthesizer's pitch. All the assignments are done in the Matrix tab. I want to use the second envelope to control the pitch. So I have to type here a number that is at the same time the modulation range for the second envelope. The modulation range tells, in that case, by how much the pitch of the screech can change. The pitch of the sound changes, but while here we can set only the modulation range, the rhythm of that modulation is set within the second envelope's window. Let's bring the synthesizer's output volume low and enhance the sound with effects. To make the Screech sound gritty, we need to distort it. Let's try out the new Roar distortion effect that just came with Live 12. It's a multi-stage saturation effect with flexible routing and modulation capabilities, so for this Screech sound the basic features of Roar will be good enough. I'm talking here about using only 2 out of 3 distortion stages. So far there's only a single distortion stage available, but to add more I have to change the routing to either parallel or serial. I'm going to choose serial routing because it's simpler to use than parallel routing. We are going to use small amounts of distortion, so choosing a parallel routing over a serial one will not give us any advantage anyways. A second distortion stage just popped up, so let's start distorting the lead. The first step would be to pick a wave-shaper distortion curve that will suit the sound best. Some wave-shaper curves will slightly warm up the sound, and some of them will add lots of noise to the screech. But to hear better the differences between various wave-shaper curves, I want to add a significant amount of distortion. Once that's done, I want to fine-tune the distortion amount with the amount knob. To compare the sound before and after distortion, it's best to just play the sound and turn on and off the roar effect. If it happens that the sound after distortion is too loud, so it's difficult to hear what does exactly distortion do, use the level control to turn down the output of the distortion stage. The distortion can be later fine-tuned with the bias control. It works in the same way regardless of the wave-shaper curve chosen, that's why I adjust it as the last knob. I don't need to filter out any frequencies yet, so I will leave the filter section untouched, and just before passing the sound to the second distortion stage, I will turn down the output volume once again to not redline the mixer. Now, with the second stage of distortion, I'm going to distort the sound in a different way. While the first distortion stage with tube saturation made the synthesizer warmer, I want to add some noise with the second one. Using the same approach as before, I'm going to find distortion settings that will give the Screech more noise. That's everything I wanted to get out of the Roar effect. The next effect in the processing chain will be the utility. It's a simple effect that I use to adjust both volume and stereo widths of a sound. For more convenience, I like to use separate instances of utility for both of these adjustments. I want to fit this Screech sound to the beat better. That is why I am both making the sound quieter and more narrow in the stereo field. The sound is ready for 3 more effects. The first one will be the shaper combined with another utility. With both these effects that I'm going to group now, I will create a rhythmic gate effect. Shaper is an effect that can rhythmically modulate most of Ableton parameters. To make use of that modulation, it has to be assigned at first. So I'm clicking the map button and then the gain knob in the utility. This will assign the modulation to the volume control. Now, with Live 12, there are 2 ways to set the volume modulation range in Shaper. Honestly, I'm used to the old way of adjustment, so I'm going to click the mod button and manually type the volume level that relates to the modulation curve being at the bottom, and the volume level that relates to the modulation curve being at the top. The gain knob in utility is moving accordingly to the modulation we create with the shaper. At first, let's play the Screech and make the gain knob not move past 0 decibels. I want to change the rhythm of the modulation, so at first I'm going to speed it up with rate. And now, I will throw in this window a different modulation curve. The rhythm is fine, but the volume modulation range is still too large. I don't want the sound to be completely muted once the modulation curve is at the bottom, so I'm going to replace the 0% value with something else. The modulation speed, as well as the whole shaper effect, can be modulated too, so let's create a full 4 bars long melody where I add 2 modulations. One of the modulations turns on and off the shaper and utility group, and the other one controls the modulation speed. The final Screech melody sounds like this. The second effect is the equalizer. Its most important role is to get rid of the low end that could overlap with the low end coming from the kick and bass that we made in the first part of this tutorial series, but what is also important is to cut an annoying resonance that, in case of this sound, sits in 1 kHz area. The third effect I will use today is the reverb that will make the synthesizer less dry. It's my habit to use reverb in parallel processing, so I'm grabbing the audio effect track to create 2 processing chains. One of them will have the dry sound playing, but on the reverb chain I will use the hybrid reverb effect with the dry-wet set to 100%. I want the reverb to sound as natural and transparent as possible. One of most natural types of reverb is the Hall reverb. Hybrid reverb gives you lots of whole types of reverb in its convolution engine. The convolution engine is the part that is controlled with yellow controls and uses small audio files called impulse responses to create the reverb. The right part of the hybrid reverb effect, the algorithmic type of reverb, will be today useless, so I'm going to disable it through the effects routing. Now, in the convolution engine, I will choose the halls category and find an impulse response that will fit the beat best. To have some context, I will play the reverb along with the dry screech sound, but I will temporarily turn its volume down so I can hear the reverb better. To enhance the rhythm of the whole sound with added reverb, I will add some pre-delay to delay the reverb in time. And I will again make the whole sound more narrow in the stereo field, this time by reducing the stereo width of the reverb. It's best to process a reverb as a separate sound, especially if we are mixing down the whole track. One of most common ways to treat the reverb is to equalize it. We equalized the dry synthesizer to make it sound cleaner, and similar equalization will be applied to the reverb. In the last part of this tutorial, I want to show you a few ways in which we can manipulate this screech sound further to make it sound different. So what parameters of either the synthesizer or effects we added so far could be adjusted to make this screech your own? What is going to give most influence over the sound itself is changing the adjustments of the wavetable synthesizer. We could start with something as simple as the pitch. Very often, screeches are created in similar way, but they sound so different because they are really played at much higher pitches. Or they are played with a lower pitch. I can also experiment with playing a simple chord with the screech sound. That means I can duplicate the whole melody and pitch it up or down to play a chord. Preferably, I would like to transpose the whole melody in steps of octaves. That is, I want the copied melody to be either 1, 2, or 3 octaves higher or below. If we want to be a bit more detailed, aside from just transposing the whole melody up or down, another place where we can change the pitch of the whole screech is inside of the wavetable. I'm talking about 2 oscillators. In tutorial, I've pitched down the second oscillator by just a semitone, but here we could also experiment with pitching one of the oscillators up or down by a whole octave. Personally, I'm not a big fan of very high-pitched screech sounds, but let's go in that direction a bit. That is why I pitched the whole melody a bit, a few semitones up, as well as one of the oscillators. What is also going to make a difference in pitch is working with the pitch envelope itself. So far, our pitch goes from a higher pitch to a lower one in time set with the attack control. Inside of the metrics tab, I can try to invert this whole modulation. So instead of typing a negative number, I will type a positive one. I can also increase the modulation range. But maybe a smaller pitch modulation range will sound more eerie. If we want to change the rhythm of that screech sound, aside from changing the melody itself in the MIDI clip, I can adjust the pitch envelope. And the simplest way to do that would be to either extend or shorten the attack time. We set the attack time to a short one, so that pitch sweep, that change in pitch is very fast. I can make use of that by creating a pattern that simply repeats the screech more times. So each time we are playing a new note, that pitch envelope is going to be re-triggered. So now we should expect to hear that fast pitch change more often. We will return to, if I remember well, the second most important step in Screech sound design, that is the unisono section. So far, the amount of unisono detune is fairly large, but if I want to add even more drift to the Screech sound, which should make it sound more aggressive, I can keep increasing the amount of unisono detune. And in the other way, if I want the sound to be less aggressive, I want to turn down the amount of detune. Minor adjustments to the unisono section can be done with either reducing or increasing the number of voices, or by changing the unison detune type. But with Screech sounds, I prefer the noise unisono detune mode best, as we can hear it adds a nice layer of noise. From minor adjustments to the Screech sound, I could include the oscillators themselves. That is, if I want to fine-tune the sound of the Screech sound, once I've adjusted the pitch envelope, the unisono section, I can try to use different wavetables in both oscillators. Further, in the processing chain, one of more obvious things to do would be to, for example, increase the amount of distortion inside of Roar. The simplest way to do that would be by increasing the drive knob. That will drive the sound more towards both distortion stages. Of course, with less drive, the sound will be less distorted, meaning the sound will sound smoother. Now, if I would like to distort the Screech by a lot, the easiest solution I can think of is adding the amp effect either after or before the Roar effect. What is important is just using the amp itself. That inside of Ableton effects is one of the most aggressive distortion effects. I want to be careful with adjusting the amp effect, as it can quickly increase the volume of the output, so I can pair it with utility that will decrease the output level. So as you could hear, there is still lots of room for distortion, but maybe not with the roar itself. Something else should be added after it or before that. Further in the processing chain we have the shaper along with utility, where I created a rhythmic gate effect. Of course, all the changes inside of shaper will relate to the rhythm of the screech sound only. And playing with these two automations, I think will give you enough opportunities to, well, create more variations of the synthesizer. Not only we can turn on and off the whole shaper and utility group, I can play around with the modulation speed as well. The equalization stuff, I considered that as a part of the mixdown. And of course, how you equalize the sound will depend on the screech itself. I want to focus more on the sound design itself and maybe not on the mixdown, so we will not touch the equalizers. That's why, in the end, I can only say that when it comes to the reverb itself, well, to make the sound more aggressive, at least we can turn up the volume of this reverb. And of course, play with different impulse responses. At last, if I would like to make this screech even more distorted, I can think of changing the effects order. Because now all the distortion effects are before the reverb effect, which means that only the dry screech sound is going to get distorted. But if I add the roar effect after the audio effect track, I'm going to at the same time distort both dry screech sound and the reverb, which can either make the synthesizer fit well into industrial techno, or if we are unlucky, it's going to make the whole synth sound like a single wall of distorted noise. Personally, to keep the sound on its cleaner side, I would keep the distortion effects before the reverb. And that's it.